right? So,
Yeah, but you were pointing out about the licensing problem. Like you mean that you believe that they sold their business somehow?
Yeah, they created their own demise.
Okay, let's hear that. Let's hear an answer for that.
Well, okay, there was a lot in there. You're right. The company was started by George Eastman, but it became a publicly traded company many years ago. And so they were always dealing with the issue of shareholders.
Thank you.
But the issue really at hand here is the technological discontinuity that occurred in the 1970s or so was that there developed a core set of technologies that enabled people to take pictures that didn't involve silver halide film, which you correctly indicate was their fundamental business. Kodak made sensitized goods and paper, film and paper, that enabled consumer photography for over 100 years. Yeah. So they sold equipment like printers and cameras and lenses for many years, but that was really just to enable the sale of film and paper because, as you might expect, it was a very profitable business to be in. Yeah. It was difficult to make film. And I have to take a little exception. I don't think they ever licensed any of the fundamental technology associated with manufacturing and developing film or paper to other people. That was a very closely guarded secret, and it was the essence of what the company made profits off of. But when it came to electronic imaging, of course, that's a whole different skill set with a whole different set of technologies. And when I demonstrated the very first digital camera system in 1976, to management, we had some of the first discussions about what a digital camera, I called it an electronic camera at the time, but fundamentally it's exactly what it is. It was a digital camera. What that might do to the photographic business. So in 1976, we had detailed conversations about this. And management got it right away. Now, there was a lot of technology that had to be developed between 76 and, let's say, 20 years later to 96. However, Kodak invested quite heavily and made many of the fundamental inventions that enabled digital photography to take hold 20 years later. A lot of people don't know that, and it's not unusual because most of the investments were made with R&D dollars, but we didn't really talk about it publicly very much at all. I remember our R&D budgets were getting close to $1 billion a year. And a lot of it going toward this imaging. Kodak was some of the people that developed the very first CCD arrays that were very large, over 1 million pixels, 1.2, 1.5 million pixels by the late 1980s. But again, we never talked much about it. We developed cameras. We had an operational DSLR that would look just like a DSLR today without a screen on the back. That was operational in 1989. Now, management was struggling with it because the technology was being matured, and we were maturing a lot of it inside the company. However, we weren't coming up with a business model that could compete with the sale of silver halide materials. And so when you had a product that you could sell, it became very difficult to convince the marketing arm of the company to sell it because, quite frankly, they didn't make nearly as much money and incurred additional risks around reliability of the new technology, training of people of the new technology. And so that became a sort of a difficult sell. So when we first launched the DSLRs in the early 1990s, and Kodak was the first one to put DSLRs out, even though they appeared in Nikon bodies, they were all developed by Kodak. Nikon didn't know anything about it. They were sold to photojournalists because they had a particular need that they could utilize the camera. They could put up with the cost of the camera, which was many thousands of dollars. They were big and they were awkward and they had to train people to use them. But they could send their pictures back to their newspaper right away. And so that was something that they couldn't do with silver halide. So they would incur all of these other bad things to get the good thing that really brought them some return. I could get a picture on the front page of my magazine or newspaper only an hour after I took the picture, which was really something unusual. So that's really how the first market started coming. When consumer cameras started coming, Kodak was there too as well. The Apple Quick Take was famously known as one of the first color consumer cameras brought out in 1994. Might surprise you to know that Kodak was the designer and development of that camera. It didn't have Kodak's name on it because we didn't want our name to be on a camera that would displace film, but we had the technology, and Apple knew that we had the technology and asked us to do that. And so that first camera that came out from Apple was designed and built by Kodak. So we had put in place a lot of the technology. We had done a lot of intellectual property work that resulted in a lot of licensing opportunities in the 2000s that enabled Kodak to take a leadership role in the development and the defining role in development of what digital cameras would be like and digital photography would be like. And also, to go to another point that you made, and I think it's a good one, Kodak was one of the few companies that was involved in all kinds of printing. You mentioned inkjet printing. You know, Kodak was involved with inkjet printing. Kodak was involved with electrophotographic printing. Kodak was involved with silver halide printing using lasers. Kodak was involved with thermal dye sublimation printing, printing with ribbons. All of those technologies were being developed at Kodak at the same time, so we were very well interested in all of the printing modalities that were going to mature and come into play in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So Kodak was at play in all of these areas. And in some cases, they made successful businesses out of them. The kiosk business, for example, was built off of thermal dye sublimation printers. I was involved with that, so I'm a little bit more familiar with that. And that became a very big business. It still is a big business today, under the name of Alaris, which was a spin-off after the bankruptcy. So that business was successful. They weren't that successful in inkjet. Electrophotographically, they were very successful, but that business in general has gone down, and you can see that with other players in that field even today. So that wasn't very well done. And silver halide printing with lasers is still done today, but obviously it's not as big a market. So it all has to do with the technologies we had in play. We utilized those. We defined those in many ways, but we didn't come up with successful business models that would really compete with that of silver halide film, which was an extremely profitable product. You mentioned going to the photo store. Yeah. Think of the business model associated with film. There were 3 customer touch points for every photographic experience. The first, when you went and bought the film, you went to the photo store. Mm-hmm. Then when you took your pictures, you took your exposed roll of film back to the photo store, mm-hmm. where you would turn it in, and then you would go pick up your prints, sometimes only an hour later, mm-hmm. sometimes a few days later. Yeah. So there were 3 trips to the photo store. Well, yeah. Think of how the photo finishers loved that. Yeah. That was a great experience. That's 3 times to sell them other stuff. Yeah. So it was a great business model. When it came to digital photography, that really didn't exist anymore. And this came up in 1976. I remember being asked the question, what about the photo finishing network? Because I told them, well, perhaps they could sell batteries, and you can imagine how well that went over. But the fact is that, it displaced the entire infrastructure as well as business model associated with what the company was built on. And it was rather difficult to leave that, to move to the digital area. Oh, by the way, there was a lot more players in the digital area. You can probably name all the major photographic companies in the 1990s. You can count them on one hand. Yeah. But the number of electronics companies that were entering the digital imaging space was massive.
Yeah, but
yeah. If you want some more of this, subscribe. If you like it, press like. But we prefer if you subscribe. All right. And plus, on top of that, if you don't want him in the country anymore, definitely subscribe.
Yeah.